Okay, now I would like to read a little bit about our guest tonight. Dr. Rob Fergus is a geographer and an ornithologist with a PhD in geography and the environment from the University of Texas at Austin. He studies human-bird interactions, including urban bird conservation, how to build a Zion that is good for birds and people, and ethno-ornithology, how birds are seen as divine messengers in societies around the world. Rob is the founder of the Hornsby Bend Bird Observatory in Austin, Texas, was formerly the senior scientist for urban bird conservation at National Audubon, and currently teaches geography and environmental studies courses at Rowan University in New Jersey. He's a former bishop and current stake seminary teacher, and Rob and his wife have pledged 3 children and currently live in Wallingford, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. So I'm glad to have you here, and I'm just going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here tonight, and those who join us later watching this. I really enjoyed the disclaimer at the beginning that definitely these views are my own, and they may not even be my own. They are just some ideas and thoughts, and hopefully will give us some things to think about, maybe some new ways to appreciate things, and hopefully have some resources to do whatever it is we're doing for the environment and for our fellow humans. So creation, fall, and atonement, these are 3 themes that as members of the church we are talked about all the time. So that's where we're going to go, but we're going to start with me here. All right. So they say, I was country before country was cool. I was country and I was a teenage bird watcher. That was definitely not cool in the 80s. There's the proof. Look at those brown corduroy pants, my little binoculars. So I was a teenage birder, went to BYU, served a mission in Ecuador, and ended up in grad school at the University of Texas in Austin. I studied anthropology at BYU and did Mesoamerican archaeology, but then I discovered geography, and that's where what I ended up getting my master's and PhD in. But what is geography? A lot of people have no idea. It's maybe something from 5th grade, states and capitals, or something like that. There's the etymology, but what I like to tell my students is that geography is the study of why things are where they are, which I love because everything has a where, which means I can study anything. And so I really love geography. Geography for me is exploring. And I bring a machete to class, my first day of class, and I knight all of my students as explorers. And we have a lot of fun exploring. So geography is exploring. It is fun. It's also a commandment. We are commanded to study things both in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, things which have been, which are, things which shortly must come to pass. So I feel like the Lord has told us that there's a lot of things out there that we should be paying attention to. So I love being a geographer. And I feel there's going to be a few little personal items here tonight. I want to share an experience that I had. This is from my journal. So this is back in 2000, I was in the middle of my PhD program, kind of struggling, figuring out what I was wanting to do, and I had a dream. So let me just read here. I had a dream that I thought to be important. I went to church and met Denise and Annalisa, my oldest daughter. I sat down toward the back of the chapel and realized we were actually on the roof of the building. And it was beautiful. There were large boulders and plants and a waterfall and a good-sized pond. I was watching a bird swimming across the pond, and as I could see from its bill that it was a European coot. I just remember it was a European coot. This is a video of a European coot that I took in Prague earlier this year. Anyway, I was up there on this roof with this pond and this bird, and there was a choir, and the leader was introducing the speaker, but I was just transfixed by the setting. And at that point, my alarm went off. I awoke, I thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be awesome to build buildings like that? Now, that was the same year that the conference center was dedicated. So I thought I took that as a good sign as well. So I studied birds and how to make cities good for birds and people. That's what I ended up doing my dissertation on. I created a bird observatory in Austin, Texas. My master's was actually on birds in sewage ponds. So out at the sewage pond, we created a bird observatory where we did a lot of bird surveys and studies, looking at the interactions with birds and the built environment. That led to a position at the Travis Audubon Society and then later the National Audubon Society. And then for the last decade or so, I've been teaching at several schools in the Philadelphia area, currently at Rowan. For the last few years, I've really been teaching mostly a class that's called Earth, People, and the Environment. Now, I love this class because it basically is about everything. The first third is physical geography, where the Earth and basically the whole universe comes from and the different components of the Earth. And then we move on to cultural geography, the different people of the world and why societies function the way they do. And then finally, we look at human geography, how humans interact with that environment for good and for bad. We end up with the good. But as I've been teaching this, I've realized that there's another way to look at Earth, people, and the environment and what I'm actually teaching. And that is the creation, how the earth and everything came to be, the fall, how everything diversified and got separate, and then the atonement, how we bring it all back together and heal of relationships that have been divided between us and the environment and our other people. And that's convenient because creation, fall, and atonement, as we started off saying, these are three pillars of the gospel that Bruce R. McConkie famously talked about, the three pillars of eternity, at a 1981 BYU address. So there's a little bit here, there, where he's saying that we need to understand them, and if we gain the understanding of them, then the whole eternal scheme of things will be in a position to work out our salvation. If we do not build our house of salvation on a true foundation, we will never make the spiritual progress that will prepare us to enter the eternal presence. So for Elder McConkie, the creation, the fall, and the atonement were super important for us to understand. So that's where we're going to go. Now, traditionally, and from an LDS perspective, we're usually coming at this from the scriptural account of creation, the 7 days of creation, which are great, and they've been with us for thousands of years, generated lots of imagery, art, some of it good, some of it not so great. But like I tell my students, we have to be careful with these scriptural accounts of creation. These are not the accounts that we would get if we had a GoPro strapped to a planet watching the creation. This is not a nature documentary with David Attenborough hiding behind a bush watching God creating Adam. There's something else going on, and we'll get to that, what that is in a second. We just need to remember that what these things are and what they aren't. If we go wrong, and Elder McConkie said we need to make sure we're on the solid foundation. If we go wrong, then we can get off on some sidetracks that can be dangerous for us. Here is one possibility of going wrong. We can become overly focused on those scriptural accounts and overly literal in our approach, feeling like these are, like I said, GoPro video accounts of what happened. And when we do that and we try to fit everything in there that wasn't initially meant to be in there, we get things like plesiosaurs swimming with whales and some sort of a horned dinosaur and long-necked dinosaurs up there behind the people in the sixth day of creation. That's not what this is about. So that can make us, if we become overly concrete with taking those scriptural accounts for what they aren't, then we're going to create ourselves some problems. We can also make them maybe too simplistic. Another thing you see a lot of times is these become children's type stories. Once again, dinosaurs with Adam and Eve, plesiosaurs in the ocean, trying to put stuff in there that was never meant to be there. Now, that doesn't mean that the scriptural account, just because it's not a GoPro nature documentary account of creation, isn't valuable. It's super valuable. When we look at the 6 days of creation in Genesis, it's basically a masterpiece of I wouldn't call it poetry, but of literature, in the sense of the writers here are using words to describe how the world came to be organized as opposed to chaotic. And in the first day, we have the separation of the dark and the light. In the second day, the separation of the earth, or the water and the sky. The third day, the separation of the earth, the land, from the water. And then on the fourth, fifth, and sixth days, we populate those various realms. We have the dark with the moon and the stars. We have the light populated by the sun. We have the sky populated by birds, the animals in the water. And then on the sixth day, the land gets populated. So it's a masterfully crafted story to talk about how order came to be. And it's the words that are used and the way the language is structured is amazing. It begins with a statement of 7 words of in the beginning. It ends with 3 sentences of 7 words. This number 7 is everywhere. Now, in the ancient Hebrew culture, 7 was the perfect number. So the writers here are using 7 to talk about how not just was this organized, but it's organized to be perfect, to be whole, to be complete. They use vocabulary strategically in multiples of 7. God is mentioned 35 times, or 5 times 7, more than anything else. The earth 3 times 7, heavens and firmament 3 times 7, and it was good 7 times. So there's something going on here that, if we appreciate this as a literary creation to echo the orderly creation that as they saw it, then we can appreciate this for just something very beautiful that points to truths about God and order and wholeness and completeness and the goodness of creation. And we can let the dinosaurs be for another conversation. So I love the scriptural account, but you know what? This isn't the only scriptural account of creation we even have in the Bible. We also have echoes of these stories, for instance, of the Lord splitting open Yam, the sea monster, and Tannim. These are ancient creation accounts that echo those of their surrounding peoples, including Marduk and Tiamat in the Enuma Elish creation account. So there's other creation accounts even in the scriptures, which should give us a good opportunity to say, hey, we can look at other creation accounts, including the Popol Vuh. We can look at native Aboriginal peoples' creation accounts of the rainbow serpent. Here's a creation story from the Maidu people in California. Here's a Navajo sand painting of the emergence of people through the 4 different creations. And as Latter-day Saints, we're in a great position to recognize, because it's told us in the Book of Mormon, that the Lord commands everyone, and they're commanded to write what he speaks to them. And he speaks to all the nations of the earth. And the gathering in the latter days isn't just a gathering of people, it's also the gathering of their words. So we have a divine mandate to bring these things together. Now, that might sound like a tangent, so I've got a tangent here. I love tangents because, as a geographer, a tangent is it's where a line intersects a circle at just one point, and it's part of geometry. And geometry is geometering, the measuring of the earth. traditionally part of geography. And so if I go off on tangents, the idea is hopefully to go out to touch something and come back to that circle of the conversation. So if I lose you, you get lost, feel free in the comments to throw a question in there. But I promise the point is to get back to that point. But sometimes it's great to go out and touch that little tangent. So tonight it's going to have a lot of tangents, a lot of zipping around here and there with a lot of ideas and thoughts, hopefully some of which will be useful, including this idea of the gathering. We'll return to that several times because gathering is so important as Latter-day Saints and what we're trying to do, because we're trying to gather people and their stories and their revelations. So that's a lot. So one of my favorite scriptures actually comes from Joseph's experience in Liberty Jail. Remember, this is in 1839, and he's told that a lot of revelation was going to be coming. In fact, as well might man stretch forth his puny arm to stop the Missouri River in its decreed course, or to turn it upstream as to hinder the Almighty from pouring down knowledge from heaven upon the heads of the Latter-day Saints. So what's going on with this pouring down of knowledge? How much knowledge is actually being poured down? Now, clearly a lot of knowledge has come from revelation to prophets, but so much has also come in the realm of just scientific understanding. Before 1839, there were only a small handful of scientific societies, which were mostly very general. But since then, most of what we consider science has actually taken off since that promise was given to Joseph in 1839. All of these different societies, most of the scientific discoveries that we know and love have come since then. Which leads me, and this, again, I'm not trying to proclaim any doctrine or anything here. This is just how my mind works. But I love the concept of the logos in Greek, the idea of the logos, words, and how words are used to help organize the cosmos, which is everything organized as one. And it's used, the word logos, as we know, in John 1:1 to refer to Christ as the word, the logos. And when I see that, and then I think of all the sciences that have logos in the name, it's just fun to think of Christ. Is Christ a part of cosmo logos, geo logos, bio logos? All of these sciences is this part of him pouring down knowledge on us so much that we couldn't even stop it with our puny arm if we wanted to? I think that it is. I think that science is a part of the restoration, and we don't want to try to stop that with our puny arm, because it was prophesied. It was prophesied that we would live in this time when all of these things would be revealed, including the bounds set to the heavens and the seas and all of these things. And sure enough, we have been living in this explosive time of scientific discoveries, and it's just amazing. And I love teaching this with my students. I don't get to share the prophecies so much when I'm teaching at the university, so it's nice to be with you tonight so we can celebrate how all of this knowledge is really wonderful and part of the restoration. So we're going to love the scriptural creation accounts. We're going to love the accounts from other cultures, and we'll get back to those. But science, what has it told us about how things came to be, and how does that help us also appreciate the world around us? You know, we learn about the Big Bang and how we don't know a lot about those early instances, what came before, if there was a before. There's still a lot we're trying to understand, but we as best as we can understand, matter and everything in the universe came to be in the form that we know it over a rapid amount of time, and then slowly we got galaxies forming, stars, all kinds of great things. Think about how much we've learned about stars since Joseph Smith was in Liberty Jail. This is the main sequence of stars. We classify them by their brightness and by their temperature, and you can see that main sweep across there. That's the main sequence. And then when they run out of their hydrogen fuels, they explode out into bigness, and then they collapse. These stars have a life cycle. Why should we care about this life cycle? Well, it's just so fascinating, because we are a product of the life cycle of generations and generations of stars that have gone super giant and then supernova and collapsed and become neutron stars or black holes and white dwarfs. As religious people, with things like golden things that are important for us, and maybe you like your golden rings. Where does gold come from? I mean, we're learning now that these elements come from cosmic interactions out there. In fact, much of the gold probably needs neutron stars to collide with each other in order to force the protons together enough you can have that big of an element. So stars had to go through their whole life cycle. They had to explode and collapse, and then they had to crash into each other just so we could have gold, so that could become part of the cosmic dust that swirls around, becomes the solar system, and that our solar system is over 4 billion years old. I love that science is giving us a very long story, a very big story, the biggest possible story. Again, love the Genesis account, but you can read that in just a couple minutes. And again, you can get all that symbolism. It's great. But here we have a creation story bigger than any creation story that anyone has ever had on the planet. With our science, which goes back billions of years. We've got the life cycle of the sun, where we can see where the sun's going to be. Where are we going to be when that happens? We don't know. Just a real quick video here. When we talk about the creation of the earth, we've learned just in the last 100 years about plate tectonics. You can see how different pieces of the earth's crust have been moving around through time and to form the world as we know it now. Look at this. This is an unrecognizable Earth 500 million years ago. Everything is kind of coalescing into a giant Pangea, a giant one continent. Now we're getting to the time of the dinosaurs. Now it's split apart, starting to see the world as we know it. It's amazing that we have this, and we can follow the little pieces of the earth around through time. It's just amazing. When we think about the mountains and hills, the large rivers and small streams that give beauty and variety to the earth, we've learned how this movement of the earth has created that, and it takes millions, tens of millions of years for that to happen. And it's just a fantastic process that we've learned about in science. We can study the atmosphere, the geosphere, the physical earth part, the hydrosphere, the water aspects of the earth, and then the biosphere. There's maybe 10 million different living species on the earth now. And there's been hundreds of millions that have lived for hundreds of millions of years. We have collected enough information to be able to construct this geologic time scale. These are just wonderful blessings of the restoration, stuff that has never been imagined by people in the past. We are the beneficiaries of all of this knowledge streaming down on us. And when it comes to us, we've learned so much about where we came from. And as Latter-day Saints, we're really interested in genealogy. And sometimes we talk about the ancient genealogy, but I just want to spend a couple minutes just really celebrating this ancient genealogy that we have of when animals separated out from plants and fungi. I mean, we're talking 1.3, 1.5 billion years ago when we separated from them. That means our ancestors were Archeans. And then our ancestors went one way and other populations went another way and became plants. One population became the animals and another population split off and became the fungi. And you can just chart this through time, through hundreds of millions of years. It's a fascinating, amazing story. Why should it matter? You can be a wonderful person and not know anything about this, and past generations never did. But we are in a position to be even more thankful. And we are told that we're to give thanks for everything. Well, how about your body? Where did your body come from? Where did your head, your ears, your eyes, your nose, your lips, neck, spine, heart, stomach, arms, reproductive organs, feet? You are the beneficiary of hundreds of millions of years of change and growth, and our ancient vertebrate ancestors gave us some of these things. This is a great children's book, Grandmother Fish. Once upon a time, our ancestors were fish. For adults, if you haven't taken a look at this, Your Inner Fish, it's a great book talking about the origin of different parts of our body. If you love your fingers, you got to thank our ancient tetrapod ancestors who developed these through generations and generations of adaptation to life, moving from water onto land. It's just super fascinating to think about this. When we talk about turning our hearts, the hearts of the children to their fathers and mothers, what about our non-human fathers and mothers that go back so far, that gave us fingers and eyes and lips and all of these things that we enjoy as humans? Our ancestors over 220 million years have been mammals. But most of that time, they were small little things like Jeremiah, the little shrew-like thing next to the theria here in this representation. The dark red line is our ancestors moving along, and you can see other cousins have split off through time. All of us are related. You know, this is ancient wisdom that we are related to everything on the planet, but we can chart that now. We actually are able to measure this by comparing not just our bones and that we can find in the fossil record, but the similarities of our DNA. And there's amazing stories out there that we haven't even begun to think about. One of the ones I've been looking at recently is, did birds influence the rise of primates? Our little tiny ancestors were running around in trees for 100 million years. Well, who else was up in the trees at that time? The birds. What kind of impact did they have? Well, they were probably eating us for a long time, but between 160 million years ago, when the first little mammals show up on the scene, to the time when the first primates have evolved, you know, we become more forward-looking with forward-facing eyes. We develop hands that can grab. We're jumping. We're not just scurrying. And we're starting to eat fruit and not just insects. And a lot of that probably happened in competition and maybe with predation pressure from the birds around us. But again, this is a story, part of the creation of us, that has never been revealed. And we're just starting to ask these questions of how did this interaction influence the rise of us? In my lifetime, we've learned about the Chicxulub asteroid that hit and wiped out the dinosaurs. Basically, the whole Earth caught on fire. How did anything make it through? Well, a few things did. The ancestors of everything that are alive now did, but it was only a few lineages that then have had to separate and evolve again. Here's the primate evolution. So you can see the dotted line there with the gray. That's the Cretaceous. That dotted line is when the asteroid hit. You can see that we think that there are a few little lines, just probably a few individuals or families of different early primates that made it through that catastrophe, that baptism of fire of the earth, if you will, and have become the different primates. At that time, our ancestors were probably something like the tarsier, probably nocturnal, eating insects, jumping around in trees at night. They probably were happy not to have to compete with the birds, because back before the asteroid hit, birds had teeth. They were fierce predators. And so little ecosystem opened up. Forget about the dinosaurs. We didn't ever worry about them probably, but the birds were probably a big feature. I don't want to spend too much time on our human evolution, but just there's been thousands of ancestral species and closely related species, some of which have given us very important parts of our anatomy. This is our line, the red line down to humans. You can see how other groups have branched off through time. And as we get closer to us, we get other human species and closely related species of Australopithecines and others. I give a whole presentation on how birds made us human, again, speculating and looking at first the creation of our bodies, but then the development of human culture and how much of that may have come from imitating and following birds for finding food, including following vultures. So that's a whole nother topic for another time, but that leads us to this idea, again, the second part of the class I'm teaching with culture and cultural geography. And I give my students this definition of culture being shared learned behavior. You can go to lots of classes in the social sciences and you'll get lots of definitions of behavior. I don't think you can find one better than the one I give my students, because shared learned behavior covers everything that we consider to be cultural. And humans developed a high level of culture over millions of years, but other animals have shared learned behavior as well. But let's focus on us. And we're going to skip most of the pre-Homo sapiens evolution and just look at us, modern humans, 300,000 years. Again, that's not as big a story as the geologic timescale, but it's a great 300,000 year story of mostly hunters and gatherers, small bands of people moving about, but they spread around the world. They developed over 7,000 languages that exist now. They developed larger societies with more and more division within the society, stratification, hierarchies. They developed different traditions as they adapted to different situations around the world, which led to the development of different types of religion. Animism, probably early, the connection that they had with the animals and plants and everything around them was very personal, and they were connected to the spirits of things around them. Later, as their societies became more hierarchical with leaders like kings, they had understanding of God as a king. And so their understanding, the revelations they get, their experience with the spirit is colored by the cultures that they have. That probably leads to some, outstanding insights, but it may also color their interpretation of the spirit. And then we get the economy. And this is another thing we spend a lot of time, because when you look at the intersection of, social structure and the economy, and that explains so much of culture. And what you're really looking at when you're talking about the development of all these cultures through time, it's the fall. It's the flip side of creation. Creation is going to create a lot of diversity, but when you get that diversity, you're going to get the divisions. You're going to get potentially unharmony and separation of people from people from the environment, people from the spirit, people from all kinds of things. And so basically cultural change leads to differences. And that is what takes us away from being united, being one. And it's just a natural process that happens, but it does result in divisions. The approach that has developed over the last few years is something called big history. This is where we look at the different thresholds of main events in the history, in the past. We want to use history just for the written records, but the past and all of the things that have happened in the past. And then we're looking also, what's next? What's going to be the next big threshold? And as we do that, as Latter-day Saints, I have to wonder, are we thinking big enough? We are told that the gathering is the biggest thing going on right now, but is our understanding of the gathering big enough? Is our understanding of what we're really about big enough? Now, a lot of times, especially if we just have a very limited view of history that's based on maybe the scriptural record of the Hebrew peoples, and we don't see the big full expanse of our humanity, we may not notice that the average mammal species is going to exist for 700,000 to 1,000,000 years, and we've been around for maybe 300,000. So does that give new meaning to the idea of the meridian of time or the latter days? What do we mean by latter days or the meridian of time in the context of hundreds of thousands of years of our species being there, 300,000 years of being hunters and gatherers, maybe 10, 12,000 years of agriculturalists, and 5,000 years of having state level societies. That means most of what we consider normal human behavior, normal human activities are brand new on the scene for us. And maybe our bodies aren't even really adapted to handle what's being thrown at us. Real briefly, this might be a tangent, but long-termism is something, a new philosophical idea that looks at the idea that, well, what if our species is around for a couple 100,000 years? I think as Latter-day Saints, we're so accustomed to thinking that we're in the latter days, Jesus is going to come, going to fix everything really soon, so maybe we don't have to worry about things. Some people are even hoping to accelerate the problems in the world so that Jesus will come and solve them. Is that really the wise choice? Maybe we should be thinking longer term. In the past, betting that Jesus is going to come and solve your problems has not been a winning bet. Now, I'm not saying he's not coming, but maybe we should be a little more circumspect in our actions. And hopefully, as environmental stewards, some of these ideas help us to maybe get a bigger picture, think a little bigger about what might be going on. All right, going to have to move quickly here to kind of wrap up, but again, creation is ongoing. Species are speciating. Things are still happening. Creation is ongoing. So is the fall. These are not once upon a time things that happen. They're things that happen constantly, as we're reminded in the temple that we're all supposed to consider ourselves part of the story. The creation is happening now. The fall is happening now. But what's needed to bring that all together? Well, the atonement, the healing, that Atonement, that gathering, the restoration, creating a sustainable society that heals the divisions, something that can last for eternity. And again, if we think that, City of the Phoenix is going to come down, this is all going to be imposed, and that would be nice, but I think maybe we need to look at other possibilities. And fortunately, we have many, many things to help us. Again, through science, we have a whole science of restoration ecology. I'm talking to the choir here tonight, I get it. But isn't it great? When I see restoration ecology, I always think, yep, that's part of the restoration. Isn't it wonderful? We can have an amazing vision with science and latter-day understandings from our prophets together. And as I put this slide together, I couldn't help myself when I put that word in there. I couldn't help but tweaking that a little bit. The Vizion, right? The Vizion, where there's no vision, the people perish. So what is the vision? What are we trying to build? How are we trying to help this project of Atonement and participating with the Lord in that? He created everything. Well, when we think of Zion, it's a millennial type of paradisiacal glory, terrestrial world level of creation, beautiful, wonderful, all good, as we're told in the scriptural account. But we are told that Zion in the latter days can only be built up by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom. Consecration is one of those big ones. And I love this idea of consecrated servants serving. We're told that the celestial servants, people living that celestial consecrated law, dedicating their lives to this work, are going to then minister to those that are good terrestrial people trying to make the world a better place. And then those people are going to minister to the telestial. Now, I've worked in the nonprofit field, and many nonprofits are operating at a telestial level. They're tied into the same economy that's destroying the world. And we're not going to be able to bring everybody up just by our bootstraps from the telestial world. We need consecrated servants, and our leaders have talked about this. The temple is a Zion factory where Latter-day Saints can go in and then come out with the empowered, endowed with power so they can build Zion, get us, and then work with others out there in the community to bring things up. You have to have that celestial level, helping the terrestrial good people, or you can't bring everything up to a celestial level. Well, I loved Come Follow Me this past year when we did the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah with the prophecies of all the people coming to the temple. That's the gathering, bringing people from every kindred, tongue, and people together. But are we thinking big enough when we say every tongue? Are we really thinking of all 7,000 tongues? And not just bringing those representatives from all of these cultures to the temple so they can be the leaven, they can be the salt of the earth in their own communities, but also having them gathering their traditional ecological knowledge. If Zion's going to cover the earth, we're going to have to live in harmony with all the different ecosystems, and many traditional ways of understanding those ecosystems are going to be needed for us to draw upon that. Also, this traditional spiritual knowledge that they've developed over time. So that's one of the things I've been doing. We're going to, as I finish up, I want to talk about a few of the things that I've been doing and a few of my inspirations just to share as we finish. I've been studying different Mayan language groups in Mesoamerica with Carrie Hull from BYU, looking at how birds connect to the divine and to the natural world. Lately, I've been looking at the Lenape Delaware Indians who used to live where I live. They were all removed hundreds of years ago, but fortunately, we have the names of the birds and some of their lore. And to be honest, when I'm walking around the creek in my neighborhood, the way of understanding that I'm learning from them really makes a lot of sense. And I love bringing that in to part of the restoration, gathering truth from wherever. Well, those people lived here for thousands of years. They had a way of understanding this ecosystem, and it's amazing. And multiply that by 7,000, and you get a glimpse of what's available and what we're supposed to be a part of. A few of my heroes, Wendell Berry, I don't know what to do with him, to be honest. Unsettling of America, first book I read after I graduated from BYU. That's the book that helped me realize I didn't know anything yet. He was really hard on Ezra Taft Benson and the agricultural policies of the 50s and 60s. And I think as people, Americans and Latter-day Saints, we haven't wrestled with his ideas enough. Would love to have a book club there. One last journal entry. As I was struggling to do my dissertation, what am I trying to do? I had another dream. John Clark, my BYU professor, was visiting me, and I was telling him about my dissertation. I told him I was applying Frederick Turner to Ian McHarg, and I woke up feeling that this was important, but I had no idea who Frederick Turner was. I mean, I puzzled over it for an hour. I really didn't know what it meant. I mean, I knew who Ian McHarg was. He wrote Design with Nature. He was a landscape architect, actually out here in Philadelphia, where I am now. I think I was tractor beamed out here because of that, maybe. But anyway, I puzzled it out, didn't know what to do, went to school, went to the library, found a book that I'd been looking for on the shelves for a long time. I hadn't been able to find, Restoration Ecology, checked it out. As I'm flipping through it, sure enough, there's a chapter in there by Frederick Turner. He's a professor at University of Dallas, and he really talked about an artistic element that was missing from my thinking about not just restoring as environmentalists, but creating new environments. And so that was something that became important. And I still haven't wrestled with it fully. In fact, he's written a few books since then that as I was putting this together, I realized I need to go check out and figure out where he's at. But he really emphasizes we have a choice in what we're doing, and we can actually create. And I love that, because free agency, the idea of agency being part of what we're doing and creating, again, is part of this eternal gospel principle that we need to recognize. We have a choice in what we're doing, what we're building, what we're making. And isn't that wonderful? One last hero, Malcolm Wells. He was an architect that designed earth-sheltered buildings. If you haven't checked out his stuff, wonderful. He passed away a few years ago. But his idea was, instead of just creating blight, we should be building, again, with this idea of creativity, building buildings and communities that actually harbored life with vegetation all over them. His book, Recovering America, is fantastic. He even wrote a book about birdhouses, redesigning birdhouses to make them more interesting. So a very creative, interesting guy. That's got me thinking about a potential project. If anyone wants to help me out, I don't have the artistic abilities of Malcolm Wells, but wouldn't it be great to imagine our chapels as eco chapels? What if our chapels actually, instead of looking like this lone and dreary chapel with an empty parking lot and a bare roof, nothing growing there, what if that was thriving with life? And what if the plants that lived on the roof were a native ecosystem, and we had chapels like that for every ecoregion? So if anyone watches this and is out there and wants to get with me, I'd love to put together a little booklet just to creativity. What would that look like? Wouldn't that be amazing? In my own work at the Audubon Society, before I was teaching, we came up with these invitations to help people think about creating more habitat in their yards, even if they just had a balcony in a city that they could landscape, or if they were out in an ex-urban environment, what could they do to create a beautiful world? Again, Zion has to be sustainable for people and birds and all the other living things. So there's a lot to do. We created a workbook to help communities and neighborhoods start organizing themselves around this idea of making their world better for the birds. I had a blog. I need to update it some more with some of the more recent things. We had a conference in New Zealand. I wrote 2 books about how people have been working with purple martins. Birds that out in Utah, you mostly see up in the high lakes, but out in the east, you see these big colonies on gourds or bird houses with multiple holes. These are big giant swallows that pretty much in the east now only live around people, and people are actually bringing them together and helping them. A couple last other ideas and things I'm working on is this connection between birds and the spirit and how that is manifest in lots of different cultures. I call that ornithology. One of the traditions that I'm actually really fascinated by is the ancient Roman tradition of auspices. If you're watching The Chosen, they kind of disparage that, but it's a really cool idea where a priest would try to understand the will of God by watching the birds flying, and he would measure out an area from which he would take his measure of trying to divine the will of God. That area that he measured out was called the templum, and it's where we get our word for temple. The little building or little tent that he would sit in the middle of his templum, tabernaculum. That's where we get our word for tabernacle. When we inaugurate something, these are the augurs that would be called forth to bless the founding of things. So it's a cool tradition that, could the spirit speak to people through birds? From my work in Mayan cultures, that's a whole nother talk. Yes. Finishing up, we talk about the canary in the coal mine, birds as environmental indicators. We need to be watching birds to be seeing how they're responding to how we're dealing with the environment. Well, that's a little bit of a too late of an approach. If the canary dies in your coal mine, yes, you need to get out, but your canary's dead, right? Things are bad. Maybe we should be a little more proactive. Going back to these Roman auspices, can we have auspices for a new millennium where we're asking the question, do the birds allow it? Instead of, will they all die? Would this be good for the birds? Brigham Young said, our job is to magnify all the creatures here on the earth so that they can all have their part. So those are some of the things I'm involved with, trying to bring these things into my world. One last idea. All of the countries of the world have, in theory, agreed to sustainable development goals through the United Nations. Now, do all of these line up with gospel principles? Well, they intersect. Sometimes they're parallel, sometimes they intersect. So one of the ideas I'm looking at is, let's actually take a look at those. at least in blue states, holding up a picture of all of the sustainability goals may get missionaries in the door better than talking about eternal families when everybody's divorced. So how are we working with the rest of the world to influence these sustainability goals? Some of them, we have special things to offer as the leaven, as the salt of the earth, to help our brothers and sisters in all the societies of the world build this Zion, build a sustainable thing. And I think we're missing an opportunity if we're not trying to figure out how we fit in with this. So in conclusion, creation, fall, atonement, part of this plan that the Lord has for all of us to grow and develop. Creation, beautiful, wonderful, because it creates diversity, there's going to be separation, and then that gives the Lord an opportunity to bring it all back together so that additional creation can happen, and it's an ongoing cycle that we get to be a part of as Latter-day Saints and as environmental stewards. There's a lot of work to do. It's more than just collecting names so we can bind our families together in the temple. It's creating that sustainable Zion that the Lord would find worthy of his presence. And as we've talked about tonight, there's a lot to do there. So study, explore, serve, have fun. And I hope this gave you maybe some things to think about and some resources. Would love to talk more in the future about these things. I'm so thankful for this group that brings us together to allow us to have these conversations. So thank you for that. And with that, if there's questions, hopefully we have a few moments still for some conversation.